CSCMP's Member Mondays. I'm your host, Timothy Pajak, and I'm the Membership Engagement Manager here at CSCMP. Today, we are very delighted to have Dyci Sfregola, founder and CEO of NewGen Architects. Dyci is based in Atlanta and has been a member of CSCMP for about 3 years. She spent her career in a variety of consulting, sales, and supply chain roles before founding NewGen Architects in January 2021. Dyci, welcome and thank you for your CSCMP membership.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dyci, why don't we start with your sharing a bit about your company and what it's like helping small and medium-sized firms transform their supply chain?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll start with the latter. It's very rewarding. Coming from a world where I was spending time with large enterprise organizations, my first couple of projects and my time in consulting was spent between Clorox, Chick-fil-A, and Coca-Cola. So you don't always see within the time that you're on a contract, because a lot of them are also, 3-year engagements, 5-year engagements where you're talking about an entire supply chain transformation. So working in this small space, small to medium business and startups, things just move a lot quicker. So you're able to see that reward faster. So it's almost kind of like, I liken it to doing Kaizen events or, like getting those quick wins as opposed to the entire transformational project. Even if it's transformational for a startup or a small business, it happens at a shorter amount of time. It's really compressed. So it's really rewarding to see things change and happen right away. And budgets are smaller, so everything tends to be, scrutinized and really determining exactly where the value is going to come from. At least that's very much what we do to help to make sure that companies get the ROI out of their digital modernization investments. So I also answered the first part of the questions. So what we have found that companies really get a lot of value in working with us is that we support the entire life cycle of that digital modernization. And we focus with manufacturers and distributors and really figuring out, if you want to implement a software, upgrade a software, implement some sort of hardware technology, what does that really look like? How do the systems talk to each other? How do they enable the people? How do job descriptions change? How should cross collaboration be executed? Sales and operations planning, like textbook best practice, but what does that actually look like in the context of my business? Because again, the smaller space, you don't have a department for marketing and a department for sales and a demand planning department. You don't have these big departments. You have multiple people wearing different hats. So what do these textbook, I got my certification concepts look like on the scale of my 10-person company, my 20-person company? I mean, the largest companies that we work with have, 100, 150 people, but our sweet spot is really that 20 to 50 people, 20 to 50 employees. So things just look differently when you're reading a textbook or a certification book and getting that certification and actually trying to implement with that small scale and those limited resources.
Absolutely. It's a totally different ball game than, working with Home Depot or Target.
Exactly.
Or that, right? Mm-hmm. But what's the biggest challenge you're facing then? In either in your role or challenges that you're helping some of these companies solve?
I think honestly, the challenge is very similar. So the biggest thing that I see right now, especially in the digital space, is a lack of resources. And we talk about labor shortages within supply chain all the time. And I think that's very pronounced in the digital space, because in order to really get the ROI out of digital, it requires this all-encompassing holistic view of the entire company. And you really have to understand how supply chain and product operations affect the financials, how to be able to tell that story to the C-suite, how to be able to think about now and solve the problems that you have now, but also to think about what does that look like long term? And you can't see the future. No one can see the future. So trying to balance that short-term perspective and that long-term perspective, always knowing that technology is constantly changing. So you start implementing something now that in 24 months, there's going to be something newer, better, faster. So thinking about how do you put the systems and foundations in place now to be able to remain flexible and agile in the future is a really critical skill set that I don't think organizations have found a consistent talent pipeline, which is why organizations like mine exist, to fill that gap. But we are pulling from the same pool of talent that they might be. So if they have that challenge, we also have that challenge. So when it comes to growing and scaling and essentially replicating the knowledge and the experience that I, as the founder, has, or a couple of our senior resources, getting to the point of figuring out how do we push that knowledge down? How do we train people? How do we make sure that there are more people who think and understand the way we do? I think that's a challenge that I have, as well as, our clients. And the solution for that has been, I think the temporary solution is how do you leverage AI for it? I've been seeing a lot of supply chain chat GPT prompts, and that's essentially what we try to do in digital, is help organizations understand how they can leverage digital to enable people and reduce a lot of the manual work. So instead of throwing people that don't exist, that no one can find, instead of throwing those people at the problem, you're keeping the people that you have and elevating their skill set and allowing the technology to do the repetitive tasks so that their time is freed up. And I think that's the solution until we get those skill sets through, academia. And it's something that students are learning, and, they're doing apprenticeships, and it just becomes part of the daily everything that we do within supply chain. I think the talent gap is still the biggest problem or challenge for me as a founder, as well as our clients.
This is fascinating stuff, because I think it ties in. Your company describes its work as supply chain transformation done right. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about that. What does the wrong way look like, and what does the right way look?
So the right way, I think there's definitely an order of operations. It's not one of those things to where it's like, oh, there's more than one way to skin a cat. There isn't, though. not in this. It's like, don't put the cart before the horse. So what I have seen in my experience, and what I decided was the wrong way, from my perspective, is, yes, we want to implement a tool. Well, why? Because this is hard and time consuming. Okay, cool. Well, let's go do some demos. All righty. Does anyone actually know what the salespeople are talking about? Not really, but I like this guy, so just go with them. Or this is the cheapest, so let's just do that. And we implement. Well, what's the process? Oh, let's figure it out as we're going. Okay, fast forward 6 months later. Hey, Dyci, no one's actually using the tool that we implemented. Can you come in and help us figure out why that happened? Yes, because what you should have done first was to do a readiness assessment, from a change perspective, aligning stakeholders, who's involved, who needs to have a seat at the table, getting some feedback. There's a delicate balance between the democratization of this process and too many cooks, not enough chefs in the kitchen, too many cooks in the kitchen, whatever that metaphor is. But you have to have a good balance of having everyone have a seat at the table, because it ensures buy-in. When people buy into something, they feel like there's ownership in it. And user adoption is one of the biggest challenges that can hinder getting an ROI out of the systems that you put in. So bad data, of course, is, one. People don't really think that they should clean up the data until they call the software vendor, and the software vendor says, cool, the things that I showed you in our demo, if you give your data to me really pretty and really organized in the next 3 days, we can be on track. And then 3 weeks passes and the company is still trying to figure out how to organize their data in the format that the system needs. And to that point, what is the actual standard process? Because if you ask 3 people and get 5 answers, there's no standardization to that process. And I think that the thing that people don't understand is that software and technology is not as fluid as people. Like, it has to have rules and it has to have logic, and this is what happens. It can't be, oh, well, like, it's kind of like this, but I know Jane at that supplier, so it's not really like that if I call her, but on a Tuesday at 10, right after she's had her coffee before the day gets busy, because our kids go, like, the system doesn't know that. The system knows that this is the process, this has to be the process, and that's what has to happen. So especially in that small team, everyone's wearing a lot of different hat space, there tends to not be that documentation, definition, standardization of processes. And a lot of companies overlook that step completely before they get into actually trying to transform their supply chain. And there isn't enough ROI analysis, level of impact versus level of effort. What does that matrix look like? What are you actually going to get out of it? A lot of times it's the supply chain function who's yelling the loudest and complaining the loudest, or that gut feeling of, oh, something's always late, it must be this thing. But if you take a lot of just like very basic lean and supply chain concepts of like 5 whys, finding the root cause so that you're not firefighting. A lot of supply chain transformation done right is honestly just not looking to the technology first. Looking to the processes first, looking to the people first, looking to the root causes of, these problems first. And especially in the small and medium business space, which I hate because I love technology. I love the digital aspect, but a lot of times what we find is, like, you just need a really good Excel model. Like, your Excel model is kind of trash. But if you have a really good Excel model, you don't significant business complexity, you don't have significant SKU complexity, you got really smart people who are just working into too many different, varied formats of doing things, you can streamline this with a good Excel model. Now, once you get to a certain number of people or a certain number of SKUs, obviously that doesn't work. But I would say, like, in that 5 million to 10 or 15 million range, we don't normally get into a lot of digital. So we just don't have to.
They're just gonna keep using Excel or whatever basic software they've got.
Exactly. It's definitely, I see the meme resurface maybe every quarter of the guy that says, if you could stop planning your supply chain on Excel, that would be great. And it's like, I mean, but if it works for you, and I had this conversation with the team last year when we were trying to figure out if there was some sort of kind of standard way that we could say, once you reach this volume in dollars and shipments in raw material, like whatever it looks like, you need to consider digital, or you need to consider even going deeper into what does digital mean. You need a TMS, or you need a WMS, or you need an S&OP tool, or you need an inventory management tool. And what we came up with was nothing. There was no standard because there are so many different factors that really play into that. So you can be selling, we thought about revenue, but what if you're selling 2 SKUs and that's all you have, and the demand for it is pretty seasonal. When you're going to have a busy season, when you're going to have a short season, you have dependable suppliers, and you're making $10 million. Okay, but like, why? You can almost just do that, on a notepad. But if you are, at 10 million and you have, which we talked to a cookie manufacturer, they had several co-manufacturers, several co-packers. They were selling on the airplanes. They were selling to specialty stores. They were selling direct to consumer. They were selling in Target and Sprouts, national distribution. So even though they only have 10 million in revenue, they desperately needed pretty much every, digital platform, because otherwise, how do you plan the different packaging? How do you think about the different rules that you have to, the rules of engagement for being a supplier in Target and Sprouts, you know what I mean? But also managing the D2C demand. And that's nationally, keeping up with your 3PLs who are fulfilling those orders for you. Like, that's a whole different beast. So
complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated.
Exactly.
Exactly. And then also considering, what are your objectives? So there was a company that we actually didn't end up engaging with, and we were both very excited about it, but it just didn't make sense, because they didn't have an internal supply chain lead, and their processes were just like all crazy willy-nilly, and they wanted to do this software implementation. And I told her, like, you need to spend that money, get a VP in. Get a VP who understands, because you are at the point to where you can justify the full-time headcount for a VP of operations, COO, VP of supply chain, call it whatever you want to call it, but you need an internal senior resource who can really build out these systems and maintain them for you based off of, what I've seen. And you're just not, there's no readiness for digital. So that was before we actually created the readiness assessment, and we created that service offering to support. But she also had like a budget to hire like 3 different people, and it just made sense for her to do it internally. And there just wasn't enough complexity to say, okay, add on an additional tool. They were using Modus. I don't know if you've heard of Modus. But they were like that perfect niche customer for them. And there just wasn't really anything else to do digitally. It was a lot of, going back to that supply chain transformation done right, get your people in place, clean up your processes. If you're already saying that you guys have this on the, the docket and you're going to do it internally, do all that first, and then call us back when and if you need help with some sort of other tool selection or integrations or something like that. But it doesn't, there's no hard and fast rule for Excel. There's no hard and fast rule for, when to think about graduating into the next level, supply chain 2.0. I call it baby's first supply chain sometimes, depending on where an organization is. It really just depends, which is why we created what has been tremendously successful. We created last quarter, and we're already kicking off 4 customers this quarter for this service. But it's readiness assessments, it's process improvement, it's the basics of lean, it's the basics of Six Sigma, it's figuring out what people are going to do and where, it's tool selection, it's the very first things you should be doing when you're thinking about some sort of, technology enabled supply chain transformation. And we give you the complete roadmap. Because we work with small customers, it's like 2 weeks, per site. It's a week with us, and then a week of us just like internally getting all the deliverables together. And by the end of those 2 weeks, you have a full roadmap from a technology perspective, organizational hires, processes documented, identification of opportunities for process improvement, as well as things that could be automated. And then what that would cost, who you could deal with, or you can decide to, do it internally yourself. And organizations have found that to be very valuable, because we don't charge like $200,000 McKinsey prices for the deliverable presentation.
just for the PowerPoint, right?
Yes, exactly. It's not like, all righty, here's $100,000 for the week, and then if you want us to send this to you, you can pay your balance for the other 100,000. No, we don't do that. And it's also it's standard prices. It's not something that's like, oh, it depends on complexity and blah 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 blah. Because the assessment piece is pretty much rinse and repeat. Now, if you have like a large warehouse or, something like that, that might change. But directionally, if it's 2 weeks and it's $16,000, it's not like crazy hidden cost. This is recorded. I will tell everybody, you know what I mean? It's not something that is going to take up a significant amount of time. And it's like, we're uncovering a lot of, okay, I'm so glad I spent that $16,000 instead of spending 6 months spinning my wheels trying to figure out, how I would have done it myself, because at least I know everything and everything's been uncovered.
This has been great. Thank you so much for the insights into, what your company does and the whole process that you go through. I want to pivot a little bit. You talked about your own career and how you kind of got to this place, right? So let's start with this. So in your Meta member profile, which at the time that we're having this conversation, it hasn't been published yet. It's going to be published later this year. But I think we asked you to share a story of how you got into supply chain. And I know you started at a 3PL and you studied industrial engineering at Georgia. Well, tell us more about what brought you to a 3PL and how that evolved to, running your own company.
Very, very interesting story. I am full of interesting stories, but this one is a very interesting story. So I actually studied Spanish linguistics and literature at UGA. And I only have that degree because at the time, and I'm dating myself here, but the Hope Scholarship within Georgia, if you went to high school in Georgia, paid for full tuition and fees. I thought that like stayed for forever until you graduated, but apparently it stays and they pay for it until you reach 120 hours or a degree and you graduate, whichever comes first. So I received an email from my graduation advisor the fall before I was supposed to, or the fall, I guess, of graduation, because I graduated in the spring. And she said, hey, graduation's coming up. I was like, no, graduation's not coming up. I just changed my major. And she said, oh, well, you can keep paying for it if that's what you want to do. And I said, no, what are my options? And she looked at all of my coursework and she said, you could take a degree in Spanish if you take these 4 courses over the next 2 semesters. So that's how I got a degree in Spanish. So I graduated, moved to Europe very shortly after graduation and spent some time in marketing there, which was easy because I spoke Spanish. I picked up Italian very quickly. So I lived in Milan. And then I started doing some like 100% travel automotive work, PR, marketing, consulting, and spent a stint as a flight attendant. And while I was at an auto show with Jaguar Land Rover, I met an engineer who was doing some really cool stuff with the cars and just like enhancing, user experience and how can we add value to people's lives, especially when people spend so much time in their cars, et cetera. And I was like, I think I'm going to go back to school, finally listening to my dad of what he told me for many, many years, who's an engineer. I'm going to go back and do industrial engineering. And I did not know, coming back from Europe and off of that stint of like, what have you been doing with your life? I don't know. I was a flight attendant and I was doing marketing, I was doing PR, and then I taught English for a little bit. Like, what does that resume look like? Who's going to hire me? And a couple of friends said, you should try sales. You know what I mean? Like, you should try to get into sales. And that is how I ended up. I found an account executive. Oh, okay. Okay. Yellow. Okay. Okay. And the only company that would hire me was a 3PL.
So what brought you from the 3PL then to, starting your own firm then? What
Oh, yes, everything in between there. So I had a little stint at 3PL, and my husband, while he was playing at an event, he does piano and voice. He met the president for a consulting firm here in Atlanta that has since been acquired, and they're not around anymore as who they were when I was working with them. And he said, oh, my wife's an engineer. I was studying at the time, was not yet, even we're close. My wife's an engineer. So we came to Atlanta for her job, which was also not true. But in my husband's defense, he was still learning English. And it's also very difficult to understand what people in supply chain do, because at the time he was also telling everyone that I just worked for UPS, because the 3PL that I worked for had a small parcel division and the partnership was with UPS. So it was easy for him to just tell people that I worked at UPS. So I told the president, look, I have no idea what it is that you do. They were doing supply chain software implementations for manufacturers. Like, didn't understand any of the words, had no idea what the job descriptions that were open on the website said. But I sent him an email and I said, I'm really smart. I already have a degree. I'm going back to school and I have a lot of marketing and sales experience. So I'm going to be taking courses that align with what you guys are executing on for customers. So I'm pretty sure that there's a way we can make this work. And I got a marketing internship with them. And I started off like reformatting PowerPoint proposals and proofreading SOWs every day, all day for like 6 months. And I thought it was the worst thing ever. But I remember telling my husband, I'm sure that all of this is important. So I'm just going to keep my head down and keep doing the work. And it was very, very valuable. Like, looking back at it now, I'm so glad that was the decision I made, because I learned so much about how to communicate value and what the problems were and how to do that. Because I was proofreading a lot of deliverables. It was a larger company. So there were a lot of 70-page PowerPoints and 90-page PowerPoints, and how to present data and how to know your audience. And, when you're talking to the end users, it's different than when you're talking to the C-suite and telling them what your findings were. So I just read a lot of those for about 6 months. And then once I finished the first part of my degree, the rest of it was online. So I transitioned into doing client work fairly quickly. And then when that company was acquired, I went to go work at a smaller firm that was only doing Anaplan implementations for supply chain. And they were doing supply chain and finance. And I focused on the supply chain side. And then when the pandemic hit, I didn't want to keep doing software implementations for companies where people were working day jobs and night jobs, trying to keep up with the implementation. I didn't like the role that I was playing in that. I was configuring the software, and the business needs that had to work with me were working 60, 70-hour weeks consistently through these 6-9 month implementations, and missing time with their family, and burning out. And I just didn't like the role that I was playing in normalizing overly aggressive timelines and poorly scoped projects, and budgets that were kind of just pulled out of the sky. And I decided that I was going to create an organization and just do it the right way. So supply chain transformation done right, like software implementations done right, where people aren't working and burning out for a tool that they're probably not going to use because it doesn't actually meet the business needs. I just think that it's ludicrous that it's the same missteps over and over again. I mean, I've talked to people who've been in this industry significantly longer than I have, and it hasn't changed. It's the same missteps. It's not like, defining processes before you actually start working is new. Like, that's not intellectual property. I didn't come up with that idea. You know what I mean? It's things that people have been talking about in, thought leaders within the industry for decades. So I wanted to play my part in being part of the solution, as opposed to continue to normalize 70% of technology implementations fail and that they don't meet the expected ROI. Like, it's not a secret why. Like, just stop doing the stuff that you're not supposed to do.
talk with the end user before basic stuff like
Yes,
that, right?
like,
Yeah.
yeah, don't like every the people. I mean, there was the time where everyone I was sitting in the room with was like VPs and no one was actually going to use it. And I remember talking about the need for change management, like training. This is 70 users. And I remember the head of change management at this organization, at the client, saying, we don't need to do that. They're just clicking in Excel and now they're going to click in a different system. Okay, all righty. At the time, I was very junior, like not my place to ruffle feathers and make, waves. But when it came time to where the VPs at the organization started to realize, oh, like, no, DC was right. We do need to have more significant training for all of these users. The head of change management said, well, this has been the plan for 6 months, so that's what we're going to stick with. I'm like, dude, if supply chain said this was the plan for 6 months, that's what we're going to stick with. Like, who knows where we would be in the world? Like, dude, agility, you get new information, you have to change. You know what I mean? It's not just, sure, what I made the decision at the time with the information that I have. Now that I have received new, better information, we have to pivot and we have to change. It's not just, oh no, this is what we said we were going to do. So we're just going to stick with that.
Cost, right? Yeah, it's on cost at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how has your CSCMP membership been impactful in all of this?
It has been great to connect with people within CSCMP that have so many different expertise within the supply chain, and just be able to leverage that knowledge and leverage those relationships to be able to bring value to the ecosystem as a whole. I mean, I've met people through CSCMP and other organizations that we've partnered with. I have like phone a friend lines. It's impossible within the function of supply chain to know everything about supply chain, in a way to where you can really provide value and advisory and guidance to someone. So, when we have a customer that's doing something demand planning, I mean, by the time we get into all of the layers, of course, there's a logistics expert that I need, and there is a purchasing expert that I need. And because CSCMP has all of the different networking events and the conference and the roundtables, it's so easy to connect with professionals and really share ideas and solutions for how we can, make an impact on the industry.
Absolutely. What would be your advice for someone who's just joining CSCMP and wants to take advantage of benefits and get connected with other members? What would you suggest they do?
I think that the mentoring program is great, to really be able to develop some deep one-on-one long-term relationships with people, whether you're a mentee or whether you're a mentor, and then getting involved with a roundtable. I know that everyone doesn't always have the opportunity to, go to a place physically and just with schedules and things like that. I don't always, with the little one at home who has joined us and blessed us with his presence. But there are a lot of virtual opportunities, and like with anything, you get out of it what you put into it. So, if you put into the work and you really make time to do stuff, then you'll definitely get the value out of the organization.
Awesome. And I have one last question. I know we're running short on time. So, what's something I didn't ask you, Dyci, that you'd like other CSCMP members to either know about you or know about your company?
I don't know. I think I covered a lot. I would say that I cover a lot more stories. So if you want to hear more stories, I do have my show Action Items. That is under the Let's Talk Supply Chain umbrella. So I do that show the second Friday of every month at 10 a.m. Eastern. And it's live, and we cover a lot of different topics related to supply chain. I have software vendors on, I have practitioners on, I have other consultants on, and it's all things related to digital supply chain and supply chain transformation. And it's called action items because it's very actionable takeaways that you can start working with your team and start working within your organization to improve the way that you do supply chain and product operations. I really wanted to create content and provide value within the industry that wasn't like, go start an S&OP process. Like, great, I'm going to do that tomorrow. That's not going to take a long time. That's not complex at all. I'm just going to implement an S&OP process. So we do a lot more bite-sized pieces of what you can actually start to implement and execute on with the team, regardless of the size, complexity, financial constraints of your organization.
That's on LinkedIn Live, right?
It's on LinkedIn Live, and then it's recorded and sent out via YouTube and LinkedIn as well. So you can either sign up at Let's Talk Supply Chain or on our website at nugentarchitects.com to get the email notifications. But if you attend through, or like if you mark that you will attend through LinkedIn, I do also send out the recording link as a message. So it's a couple of different ways you can consume the content.
Awesome. I appreciate that. That's all the time we have today. Dyci, thank you so much for your membership with CSCMP, and we appreciate you joining us for this edition of Member Mondays.
Thank you. It was a great conversation.